When development started on Final Fantasy VII, the initial plan was to have it serve as a quick follow-up to Final Fantasy VI that would be released on the Super Famicom. The graphical style would stay much the same, but as had been the case with every previous iteration, there was an assumption that a significant amount of intrigue would be generated amongst gamers by there being an original cast of characters, brand new music, and refreshing and exciting innovations that would manifest via the various gameplay systems, as well as how the story would be delivered. Due to unforeseen circumstances, that version of Final Fantasy VII didn't ever manifest into anything concrete, but numerous concepts were carried over from the initial vision to a new vision that would end up being developed for the PlayStation. These changes meant that even though from a visual perspective Final Fantasy VII would look almost nothing like its predecessor, there were still numerous similarities that existed between the two products, and it's quite clear that concepts that were created for Final Fantasy VI would end up being evolved for its follow-up. That notion holds true for almost every aspect of the game, but today we're going to focus on one specific element, the main antagonist. Over the past 34 and a bit years, we've been graced with a multitude of antagonists across the entire Final Fantasy franchise. Each has come with their own unique brand of wit, power and evil, but there are two who stand alone when it comes to their impact, Kefka Palazzo and Sephiroth. That's not to say that they are the best antagonists to have graced the franchise, but it's hard to deny that they have been able to permeate into popular culture in ways that other antagonists have not been able to. And it's interesting that it's those two in particular, as just like we mentioned before in relation to the two games they featured in, if you focus away from their clear visual differences, Kefka and Sephiroth aren't all that different from a narrative perspective, but also from a gameplay one. Not too much is known about the early lives of either individual, but we do know that they each shared disrupted childhoods, with neither of them raised by their biological parents. In the case of Kefka, this meant joining an orphanage before then arriving in Vector and choosing to enlist in the military of the Gestalian Empire. And it was here, after showing much promise, that Kefka rose through the ranks due to his reputation as a fearsome warrior. This reputation made him the prime candidate for an experiment that was due to be conducted by the Gestalian Empire's chief scientist, Cid Del Norte Marquez, but the experiment was fraught with great risk. Always keen to seek new sources of power, the Empire realised that they could exploit espers, extracting their essence to create magitech. This latest experiment would see the Empire attempt to fuse the essence of espers into a human to create what they dubbed a magitech knight, and Kefka was put forward as the guinea pig. Upon the conclusion of the experiment, Cid was proved correct. Humans could become fused with magitech, but there was a horrible and unforeseen side effect. The injection of magic power shattered Kefka's psyche, filling him with a hunger for chaos and destruction. Yet even though this should have been seen as a negative, Emperor Gestal was thrilled, even restructuring the military so that Kefka would hold one of the most senior positions. This would set the stage for an epic story that would be later rivaled by Final Fantasy VII, but even though there would be clear differences between the two narratives, and the core elements of Kefka and Sephiroth were not replicated with a one-to-one relationship, there were clear parallels woven into the fabrics of their respective beings. Much like Emperor Gestal, President Shinra was an ambitious man, driven by greed and a ruthless pursuit for power. As such, a significant amount of resources were assigned to uncovering knowledge that could be used to help Shinra strengthen their grip on the planet. They had known for some time about an ancient race called the Cetra who had an affinity with magic. And when scientists excavated the northern crater, they thought they had uncovered remains that were of Cetran origin. This discovery was not too different from Gestal's discovery of the Esper world, and with a suitable specimen recovered, it led to the creation of a project that would have one goal: extracting power. Much like Cid, Dr. Hollander and Professor Hojo would explore waves of unethical experimentation, and they would both draw the conclusion that one of the most suitable ways to extract the power and knowledge housed within the remains that they found would be to join them with the DNA of a human. This conclusion led to the establishment of Project G and Project S, but unlike Cid, who chose to experiment on grown humans, Hollander and Hojo conducted their experiments on unborn children, and Sephiroth would be born as part of Project S. Unlike Project G, where the host would be injected with cells prior to conception, Project S would see Genova cells injected directly into the womb of an already pregnant subject, in this case Lucrezia Crescent. The hypothesis was that the cells would merge with the fetus to create an enhanced human, and it proved to be a correct assertion, as Lucrezia gave birth to a healthy baby. But the pregnancy took its toll. Lucrezia chose to run away from Shinra, and in the name of science, Professor Hojo forwent his responsibilities as a parent in order to study Sephiroth from afar. It would see Sephiroth raised, essentially, as a lab rat, with other scientists and various parental figures employed to test and manipulate him, and once they were assured of the power that was housed within, Sephiroth was enlisted into the military to be of service to President Shinra, as the poster child for Soldier, an organisation where, much like Kefka, he would be granted immense power and trust as one of the most senior figures. Unlike Kefka though, Sephiroth would only end up losing his sanity upon learning the truth about his origins, but the result was the same: the abandonment of virtuous principles, the betrayal of the organisation they were once proud to be a part of, and the murder of the person who headed the respective power that they were once an integral part of. They would then set about attempting to rebirth their respective worlds, with Kefka using the light of judgment and Sephiroth using the power of Meteor. When both started to unleash their true power upon the world and became activated, there was also a seismic shift within their respective worlds, and this shift resulted in a significant change to the beings that roamed the land. In the case of Sephiroth, as the planet sought to defend itself against this new threat, 5 weapons were activated. They were each powerful entities, with 2 fought as part of the core experience, 1 destroyed before that were even possible, and 2 appearing as super bosses. In the case of Kefka, after the world was sent into ruin, monsters of legend were released, including Humbaba, Deathgaze, and the 8 legendary dragons. Unlike Weapon, which were activated to try and seek out threats that sought to harm the planet, Kefka invited these legendary monsters to wreak havoc as they saw fit. Humbaba would be fought as part of the narrative, but even though they were each strong in their own right, none of the other enemies were considered a super boss. That wouldn't be added until the Game Boy Advance port, as the Kaiser Dragon was reinserted into the game after being dummied out of the original Super Nintendo version. Now this part is quite a chilling comparison, as even though the motivations of Kefka and Sephiroth were not the same, the actions that led to their change of heart, as well as the actions that they took afterwards, were closely aligned, and that's without even talking about the relationship they each had with the individual who could be considered the game's main protagonist. Terra was taken from the Esper world at a young age, held hostage by the Gestalian Empire as a science experiment, and after having his moral inhibitions removed, Kefka chose to push boundaries, enslaving Terra and forcing her to carry out his will. Having learnt a great deal about Magitech technology, Kefka was able to construct a device called the Slave Crown. When placed upon an individual's head, this device would allow him to control their actions, and in Terra, Kefka believed he had the perfect test subject. With the crown installed, Kefka sanctioned a battle to the death against 50 of his own soldiers. They were each wearing Magitech armour, but with Kefka controlling Terra's actions, it was no contest. The soldiers were wiped out within 3 minutes, with Kefka even ordering Terra to burn them while they were still alive. It would only be through chance that Kefka's grip over Terra would be broken, but the mental scars would stay with her for some time, and the pain would only be compounded after seeing Kefka destroy numerous members of the Esper race and any connection she had to her true home. As if to serve as a juxtaposition to Kefka and Terra, where the aggressor was the subject of adult experimentation and the victim was the subject of childhood experimentation, the roles of Cloud and Sephiroth were reversed, but it was through the experimentation that Cloud would undergo that his mind would be weakened. After Sephiroth had decimated the town of Nibelheim, killing Cloud's mother in the process and destroying almost any connection Cloud had to his childhood, Shinra swooped in to take advantage, experimenting on survivors of the Nibelheim incident to test what would be dubbed the reunion theory. Professor Hojo surmised that Jenova's cells would only tolerate being separated for a certain period of time, and that once that time expired, they would attempt to recombine. To test this theory out, individuals were injected with Genova cells, and one of those individuals was Cloud. Unlike many of the other test subjects, who would end up becoming mindless puppets called Sephiroth clones, Cloud developed Mako poisoning and was labelled a failure by Hojo, held alongside Zack Fair within the Shinra mansion for years. After escaping, Cloud's mind started to repair, but it was never able to escape the draw of Sephiroth. And instead of pursuing him, as he and the rest of Avalanche assumed was happening, Cloud was instead being manipulated by Sephiroth, something that would culminate in Cloud arriving with the black materia at the Whirlwind Maze and handing it over to his master. It was only once Cloud's mind was rebuilt, thanks to a significant contribution from Aerith and Tifa, that he would be able to gain defenses against the will of Sephiroth, but as with Terra, the mental scars didn't just disappear, and they would stay with him for years afterwards. The two famed antagonists also shared mechanical similarities outside of the story, further deepening the connection that exists. Both of the final encounters will be multi-part affairs, with Kefka and Sephiroth assuming numerous forms along the way. And when fought against in their respective final iterations of these elongated showdowns, Kefka and Sephiroth would sprout angelic wings. Kefka had 6 wings, 4 white and 2 dark, while Sephiroth had 7 wings, 6 white and 1 dark in place of an arm. This in itself would serve as an interesting similarity, with another being the number of wings each of them had, something that related to the iteration of the Final Fantasy franchise in which they resided. Another similarity came in the moves they were given access to by the development teams, as both Kefka and Sephiroth were able to cause considerable pain via a move called Heartless Angel. In both games, when used, Heartless Angel would see an angelic figure come down from above in similar fashion to the typical raise animation, except instead of healing, the angel would cause damage, reducing the HP of all allies to just 1. You could also throw in their amazing final boss themes composed by Nobuo Uematsu as further comparison, but that's not an in-game trait per se, nor is their actual character theme being overshadowed by music that plays in their final encounter. But either way, even though differences do exist between Kefka and Sephiroth, it's also clear that there are plenty of similarities, and when working on building up the narratives of their respective games, the scenario writers must have chosen not to stray too far from what they knew. And to us, at least, all of that is pretty fascinating. If you agree, we would encourage you to hit that like button, share this video around, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure you keep your eye out for a future video where we'll be discussing our plans for the channel throughout 2022, as well as updates to our Patreon. Alright guys, with that, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, Anthony Hoffman and Gregory, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.